On the morning of May 7th, 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy's light aircraft carrier, Shōhō, came under a ferocious air assault in the Coral Sea. Over a span of just 23 minutes, US Navy dive bombers and torpedo planes pummeled the small carrier. Shōhō slipped beneath the waves, becoming the first Japanese aircraft carrier sunk in World War II. Explore Shōhō. From her unique design, final moments at the Battle of the Coral Sea, and the aftermath of Japan's first carrier loss. Shōhō began her life not as an aircraft carrier at all, but as a submarine support ship. Laid down in 1934 and launched in 1935 under the name Tsurugisaki, she was built as a combined oiler and submarine tender. Japanese naval planners had deliberately designed Tsurugisaki and her sister ship, the future Zuiho, as convertible vessels that could be quickly transformed into light carriers if war broke out. This clever workaround skirted treaty limits. By classifying the ships as auxiliaries, the Imperial Japanese Navy could essentially have undeclared carriers in waiting. As tensions in the Pacific rose, that contingency plan was put into action. In 1940 to 41, Tsurugisaki entered the yard for reconstruction. Her superstructure was stripped off and replaced with a full-length flight deck and hangar, and she was formally renamed Shōhō, meaning Auspicious Phoenix, upon her recommissioning as a carrier. Shōhō was a light aircraft carrier, considerably smaller than Japan's fleet carriers. After conversion, she measured about 674 feet in length and displaced around 11,400 tons. To support flight operations on such a compact hull, Shōhō was built with a flush flight deck without an island superstructure. Below the flight deck lay a single hangar serviced by 2 centerline aircraft elevators. Originally designed to carry roughly 30 aircraft, Shōhō was modestly equipped by carrier standards, but her conversion included substantial changes to propulsion. The ship's original diesel engines were replaced with a pair of geared steam turbines that produced 52,000 shaft horsepower, driving 2 shafts, giving Shōhō a top speed of about 28 knots, just enough to keep up with fleet operations. In terms of protection and firepower, Shōhō was lightly armed. Her primary armament consisted of 8 5-inch Type 89 dual-purpose guns in 4 twin mounts, positioned along the sides of the hull. These guns could engage aircraft or surface targets, but they were of limited use against high-speed dive bombers. For close-in defense, Shōhō was originally fitted with just 4 twin 25mm Type 96 anti-aircraft gun mounts, a relatively sparse anti-aircraft suite. In April 1942, during a brief refit, 4 triple 25mm mounts were added in addition to her twin mounts in an attempt to bolster her defenses. Notably, Shōhō had no armor to speak of on her flight deck. She relied on speed and maneuvering for protection. With her flush deck design and lack of an island, the carrier's silhouette was low and clean. But this also meant the bridge and flight control had to be located below decks, which complicated operations. Overall, Shōhō's design was heavily compromised, born of necessity. A small, second-line carrier created from an auxiliary hull, useful for providing air cover to convoys and invasion forces, but never intended to go toe-to-toe with any large combatant. Shōhō's career would prove very short. After completing the carrier conversion, she was formally commissioned as a carrier on November 30th, 1941, just days before the Pacific War began. Captain Izawa Ishinosuke took command, and Shōhō was assigned to the 4th Carrier Division, alongside her sister Zuiho. In these early weeks, Shōhō was still being outfitted and training her crew. In the opening months of 1942, she was used primarily as an aircraft ferry, shuttling fighters and bombers to forward bases. Departing Japan in February, she delivered assembled and crated Zero fighters to Truk and Rabaul, with her crew assisting in their assembly for local defense. Through March, she continued transport duties, including a delivery of 19 Zeros to Rabaul to strengthen Japanese air cover in New Guinea. Her first brush with combat came in mid-April 1942, when she sortied in response to the Doolittle raid. Joining a cruiser force in the Western Pacific, she briefly searched for the American carriers, but returned to port after the pursuit was abandoned. At the end of April, Shōhō was assigned to Operation MO, Japan's plan to capture Port Moresby. After a short maintenance period in which her anti-aircraft suite was strengthened, she departed for Truk on April 24th. Her embarked air group was under strength, 12 fighters, including several older A5M IV Claudes and 6 B5N2 Kate torpedo bombers, but sufficient for the convoy escort role she was to perform. Joining Rear Admiral Goto's covering force of heavy cruisers, Shōhō provided air patrols during the occupation of Tulagi on May 3rd, withdrawing that evening to shield the main invasion convoy. On May 6th, she was unsuccessfully attacked by high-flying US B-17 bombers, the near misses betraying her position to Allied reconnaissance. By nightfall, she was still on station south of the WWII archipelago, unaware that a major American carrier strike was being prepared for the next morning. The events of May 7th, 1942, would bring her brief career to a violent end. At dawn on May 7th, 1942, both navies launched scout planes into the overcast skies of the Coral Sea, each hunting for the other's carriers. The Americans struck first. Shortly after 7:30 a.m., US reconnaissance spotted Goto's cruiser covering force and the Port Moresby invasion convoy in Shōhō's vicinity. The report was misinterpreted at Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's flagship, leading the Americans to believe they had found the main Japanese carrier force. Seizing the opportunity, Fletcher directed every available strike aircraft to the attack. From the decks of USS Lexington and USS Yorktown, a massive wave of aircraft roared off. In total, 53 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers, 22 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, and 18 F-4F Wildcat fighters droned toward the sighting report. Their actual target would be the lone light carrier Shōhō. Mid-morning found Shōhō northeast of Mishima Island, escorting the invasion convoy and zigzagging under cloudy skies. On board the Japanese carrier, lookouts suddenly reported enemy aircraft diving out of the sun just before 11 a.m. Shōhō's combat air patrol at that moment consisted of only 3 fighters, 2 antiquated A5M IV Claudes and 1 A6M0 circling on station. The carrier's radar was non-existent. The IJN relied on visual sighting, so the American strike achieved near-complete surprise. As dive-bombing sirens echoed, Shōhō's few cap fighters rushed to intercept the first wave of Lexington's SBD Dauntless dive bombers just as they peeled over into their dives. Tracers arced upward from the carrier's 5-inch guns and 25mm mounts, but the sheer number of attackers was overwhelming. Despite the chaos, the initial American bomb runs were off the mark. No direct hits were scored in the first minutes, as Shōhō swerved hard and threw up anti-aircraft fire. One Dauntless was shot down by the lone Zero fighter after pulling out of its dive, and a few others were riddled with bullet holes. Sensing the threat, Shōhō's captain, Izawa, urgently launched 3 more Zero fighters from the deck to reinforce the cap as the next wave of attackers bore in. At 11:18 a.m., a second group of SBD dive bombers, part of Lexington's coordinated strike, dove through the clouds. This time, Shōhō could not evade them. Amidst the thunderous bursts of flak and plumes of smoke, 2 1,000-pound bombs smashed into Shōhō. One bomb penetrated the flight deck and exploded deep in the hangar, instantly turning the enclosed hangar into an inferno of burning aviation fuel and wrecked aircraft. Black smoke gushed upward as secondary explosions, ammunition or fueled planes igniting, shook the ship. In the same moment, a swarm of TBD Devastator torpedo bombers from Lexington's torpedo squadron swept in at low altitude. They approached from both port and starboard, skimmed over the waves, and released a deadly spread of torpedoes aimed at the writhing carrier. Eyewitness accounts say up to 5 torpedoes struck home almost simultaneously. A massive waterspout erupted alongside Shōhō as one torpedo's warhead blasted her starboard side. The torpedo hits ripped open compartments, knocking out Shōhō's steering and power and flooding both engine rooms and boiler rooms in an instant. The lights went out all over the ship, and Shōhō began to slow to a crawl, trailing smoke and listing slightly from the underwater damage. Shōhō was now a burning, crippled target. But the assault was not over. Yorktown's air group arrived moments later to deliver the coup de grace. At 11:25 a.m., a new wave of dauntless dive bombers from Yorktown dove through the cloud cover. With Shōhō dead in the water and minimal defensive fire, they struck with impunity. Japanese crew on the cruisers nearby watched in horror as about 11 more 1,000-pound bombs crashed into Shōhō, one after another. These hits tore the flight deck to shreds and added fuel to the raging fires below. Explosions blew large holes in the flight deck and sent debris showering into the sky. In quick succession, Yorktown's Devastator torpedo planes swooped in at 11:29 a.m. and launched another salvo of torpedoes at the wallowing carrier. American pilots later claimed up to 10 torpedo hits in total during the attack, though Japanese reports indicate perhaps 2 additional torpedo impacts beyond the earlier ones. Whether it was 5 or 7 torpedoes in all, the effect was the same. Shōhō was mortally wounded. By this point, Shōhō was enveloped in thick black smoke, flames leaping from multiple deck gashes. The few Japanese cap fighters still aloft made desperate strafing runs on the attacking torpedo bombers, but US Navy Wildcats pounced on them. In the skirmish above the dying carrier, 2 of Shōhō's clawed fighters and 1 Zero were shot down by American F-4Fs, effectively wiping out her air defense. At 11:31 a.m., with his ship afire from stem to stern and slowing to a stop, Captain Izawa gave the heart-wrenching order to abandon ship. Crewmen threw rafts and lashed together debris overboard, and hundreds of sailors began leaping into the oil-slicked sea as fires raged around them. Just minutes later, at 11:35 a.m., Shōhō gave a final shudder and slipped beneath the waves, stern first, in the Coral Sea. She had fought on her very first and only combat operation, and in that short span, she became the first Japanese aircraft carrier lost in the war. The sinking of Shōhō was confirmed. However, the ordeal was not over for her crew. Roughly 300 Japanese sailors survived the initial sinking, bobbing in the water amid wreckage. But Admiral Goto's remaining ships, fearing more air attacks, withdrew at high speed without stopping to pick up survivors. For hours, Shōhō's men were left scattered in the open ocean. Only in the mid-afternoon did Goto cautiously dispatch the destroyer Sazanami back to the area to search for survivors. What Sazanami found was grim. Of the carrier's entire complement, over 800 crew and airmen, only 203 men were still alive to be rescued, including Captain Izawa. The remaining 630-plus officers and crew had gone down with Shōhō or perished in the sea. It was a devastating loss of life for the Imperial Japanese Navy, and it all unfolded in barely half an hour of ferocious combat. The destruction of Shōhō had an immediate operational impact. With her gone, and fleet carrier Shokaku damaged, the Port Moresby invasion convoy no longer had sufficient air cover. Japan, fearing Allied carrier and land-based attacks, ordered the convoy to withdraw. For Japan, Shōhō's loss was a sobering first. She was the first Japanese aircraft carrier sunk in World War II, and her destruction underscored the vulnerability of lightly protected carriers with small air groups when confronted by massed carrier strikes. In Tokyo, the loss was downplayed, but among naval officers, it was a reminder that even secondary carriers could become primary targets if caught unsupported. For the Allies, her sinking was a significant morale boost. After months of largely unbroken Japanese successes, Shōhō's fate demonstrated that Japan's carrier fleet was not invincible, and that aggressive use of carrier air power could deliver decisive blows. Shōhō was never replaced, and no ship would carry her name again. Though overshadowed by later battles, her destruction marked an important opening blow in a year that would later see Japan's carrier strength steadily eroded.